specifically for you and for nobody else. Like that would be a game changer because suddenly, especially if it was on a per project basis, like you're working on in this case Transformers, it's like, well, what if there's a button to create the blasting the character effect, or to make it explode into, or the clothes explode into fragments of cloth, whatever it is that you're doing. And I'll talk about Transformers in a bit, but that sort of philosophy for me kind of really changed things, where it is that what if I could create the software in the image of how I want it to work? If I had buttons to create, my whole lighting setup, or if I didn't have to go and name all my renders over and over again. Because as a supervisor, I see people create these really ridiculously named render passes and scene files, and even when we unarchive like a old Transformers or other project that someone else worked on, and we see some of the naming files, and it's like version 3 underscore God, I hope I go home soon, or version 5 underscore final underscore this is the one underscore final 03. It's just the most ridiculous stuff that will happen over and over, and we can all kind of relate to that. But that's where I think that there's a lot of times where it's important to have render like scene files, file name files that are descriptive enough that they can be tracked and managed, but it doesn't mean that the artist needs to actually be doing that. A lot of times, like my philosophy is I don't think artists should need to load files or save files. Like I think every morning when I come in to work and I'm really tired and I got to go and review shots, if I had to manually go in and find the shot code and go into there and find the right version and load that up, wait for it to load, like all these different things, little by little, like all that time adds up. And if you look at a lot of senior artists, that's generally what we're doing. We're very expensive, and at the same time, we're doing things that eat up a lot of time that isn't necessary for us to necessarily be doing that. So that for me was always kind of like the big philosophy is like automate a lot of what we do. And especially in the last, I'd say at least 10 years, I never really thought about it, but it's been basically my secret sauce is that I've created tools to pretty much do everything that I do in production. And whenever we're taking on a new job, I'll look at, well, how can I remove myself from the production? In other words,
But it's like a
maybe
pipeline for one, like, you know what I mean? Like you don't have to have a huge team is what you're saying in a lot of ways,
exactly,
right?
it can be either way. So like one thing I was going to say is that in this case, like if I remove myself from it, it's basically that I might look dev one or two shots, and then we get the look right, the client, the director loves what we're doing, and at that point I can build a tool that does what this does, exposes all the controls for it, and makes it brain dead simple, where I can then give it to a junior or a mid artist who we could have 8 of those people for the same cost of having a senior. So in a lot of cases, you're able to save a lot of time by not needing there to be a team of seniors. Instead, they could be the ones focusing on the really important stuff, and the other people can be the ones doing all the splashes or whatever it is, knowing that the look and everything has been figured out. Now it's about just rolling it out onto the 100 Marvel shots or whatever that they've been awarded. But you're right. The flip side is that for me especially, I love working remotely. So when COVID and everything hit, it was just another day for me, unfortunately. But it also meant that with this, I want to be able to free up as much time as I can because I want to be able to take on as many jobs as I can. And that was a big turning point for me. It was working on 7 feature films from a hotel on my laptop at one point, where my render farm was in LA, and I'm able to work on all this stuff because a majority of the tools that I'm running are able to do most of the work, and then I can review the result, make some tweaks, and let it do its thing again. And I think that a lot of the time, that's what our tools are doing. Most of the effects we're working with, and all the things that are a slider at this point, it's doing a lot more under the hood. But compared to 20 years ago, we don't need to know as much about what's going on under the hood. So again, it's more about simplifying the process where it needs to be, and it's not so that way we can be removed from the equation. It's to free up time so we can be an artist more, rather than doing the redundant stuff over and over. So
That's awesome.
yeah, I mean, just to talk
What is
about,
this piece here you're talking about here?
yeah, so I thought this would be a good example. I think it's just ended, unfortunately, but that one there, and maybe someone can rewind to the beginning of just the fire clip anywhere would do. But I thought I'd just bring this up just as again a piece of eye candy, but just something fun where we had to create a lot of fire, and I was the one who had to create all the fire. And the tricky thing about doing something like that, where it involves creating lots and lots and
Unfortunately, they
lots of
can't
fire.
rewind. But can we
No
pause
worries.
it for a second? Just can we pause it for a second while Alan talks about it, so we won't talk over this? Hopefully we'll do that.
It's totally fine. So I mean, with the Evil Within stuff, that
Yeah.
whole show was tricky just because it required hundreds of trees to be on fire, large, like there's some really wide shots, then there's some not so wide shots. And because of that, it required lots of stuff going on, but you'd also be close up. So the challenges are, if you're wide, it means you got to cover a lot of ground. But then if you're close up in some shots, then there's going to be a lot of detail. And that's the tricky thing with doing fluid simulations, for instance, is the fact that how do you simulate all of that stuff? And so what I wanted to do, knowing that like I didn't have much time, I was like a week or something to work on that show. What I wanted to do is instead is just build a system where I could literally go in and look dev some fire. Like, here's a tree, here's the flames growing up the tree, here's it expanding onto one branch, crosses over to another tree, so it grows onto that tree, and then that tree now starts to burn as well. Here's an example of just fire on the ground, but a really large scale flame. So there's a few different types. Getting that stuff approved, at that point, we're able to say, okay, you've approved the look overall of these, so you can step away, and I'm going to roll this out for the entire thing. And it meant that I could probably spend like a day actually setting everything up, where I had to create hundreds and hundreds of fire sims. So what I would do is I would have a paint tool, and I would literally just go in across the entire environment, just painting wherever I wanted fire to be. And it didn't mean that everything's on fire at once. It was more controlling where fire can go, so we could create very more organic patterns and everything else. So just having a simple tool meant that I could paint on the trees, I could paint on the ground, specifically avoiding certain characters that weren't going to be on fire, whatever I wanted to do, hit a button, and the whole thing sets up all the effects. At that point, I can then have like a growth system, so it kind of grows a little bit over time, and then an activation system, so I can just animate some boxes, just kind of moving or growing, expanding over areas, just to say these are the kind of bounding boxes of where I want fire to be. And thanks for that. So it just gave me a lot more control to be able to handle a lot of stuff that 5-10 years ago you probably have, 5 or 6 artists, and just a lot of managing assets, and having to set up render paths and do all the stuff very specifically, and just a lot of hand holding and a lot of late nights. But instead it meant paint all the areas and just animate cubes, kind of activating certain things when it's time for them to light on fire or whatever it might be. And when that's all set up, you can see like a particle preview of it, and assuming it looks good, that's when you can run the sims. But at that point, you do a level set, which means that it would create like a big grid of the entire environment, and then cut it all up into smaller pieces, and then fire out all those individual sims. The idea is that for me, it isn't like, look at me, I hit a button and I walk away. It's, I actually get to get very specific about what I'm doing, but I also am focusing more on actually doing that, rather than doing what I'd usually do, which is copy the sim or create a new one, load up the preset, set up the output paths. Like, there's so many steps. If this was a conveyor belt system, it would be 100 steps. And for me to do it alone, it would take me a month, 2 months to do. But instead, it meant that all my time is dedicated just to being the artist and actually getting the controls, everything I want. So I thought that would be a good example, just because it meant that I was an artist 100% of the time. And all the things that would take up all my time, the things that are the big time suck, they go out the window,
Yeah.
including render passes, comping, because again, like, if everything's named correctly because it's not done by a human, it means that then the comp can pick it up and assemble the nuke file or fusion file, whatever it might be, and everything will work. So just to jump around a little bit, like, one of the big philosophies that I've adopted over the past decade has been that, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, I try to avoid ever working on version 1 of a file. So a good example would be, there's a short film called Flight. I also worked on the movie Flight, a bit confusing, but with the short film, it was done by John and Josh Baker. They directed the movie Kin with Michael B. Jordan. They're buddies of mine. We go way back, and they had this short film that this parkour guy doing all these stunts, he had like these shoes that were meant to have all these effects going on. And the idea was that we just get the match moving company to make sure they name the shoes, left shoe and right shoe correctly and everything else. I can look dev 1 or 2 shots, get John and Josh to approve the look. At that point, I just let all the files run, and all the match move files get imported into the shot. It assembles, it mats out all the geometry, the camera tracks come in, everything kind of gets assembled automatically. And it means that at that point, the simulations get applied, all the different effects get applied into separate max files, separate sims. Everything fires off to the farm, everything sims, everything goes into the render farm from there as dependencies and starts to render everything out. Everything goes in a comp, everything renders out as quick times with slates, watermarks, everything that's needed, and then we get to review it. The whole point of doing all that is not to show off. It's because then you can sit down, review them all, and you can say, that looks good, got to tweak a few things there. That one broke, I don't know what's going on, I'll have to look at that. And these ones here, I'm going to need to, just dial in the settings a little bit, but we're like 80% there. And again, like you guys knowing from working in production, it's very easy to get to 90% or 99%. So the last 1%, that's going to be the bit that takes the most time. So how quick can you get to that point? So for me, it got to that point of working on multiple shows where when it called for it, I could just let sims run and let the whole shot get set up automatically where I'm not having to do all that stuff. And it means that instead I get to look at the final render, the comp, then make creative decisions about, what needs a little bit of tweaking, what can I actually send off occasionally on version 1, I can send it off to actually get feedback from the client. And then there's a few that something went wrong and I got to look into that. But it doesn't mean that I'm doing all the hand holding from day one. It means that we can then jump in at that point and actually start doing real work. So it's just little things like that. And at that point, you can actually hand it over to a junior or a mid to be able to jump on it, and they'll know what to do to, if the camera flipped or, something got disconnected, the fluid sim went out of the grid, whatever the issue might be, that's a chance to go in and do all the tech fixes, the troubleshooting for it.
Do we have the last part of the video? I'm not sure if we have the last part of the video. That'd be great to cue that up because I think you show off some of the way that process of what it could be. But if it's not available, that's okay. We can talk over it. But it was I remember specifically. It was a very, very simple example of what you just said. I was on Stealth, the movie Stealth, which is a great movie. You should totally watch that movie. No, it's not. It was a terrible movie, but there was a lot of canopies that we had to do, right? And the canopies had all this stuff that we had to put in there. So because they shot it obviously without canopies, and we had to add the canopies in CG. And basically it was a matter of tracking. It was just a tracking thing. And then they had all these elements to do all the comping. And they asked the lighting team to do all the rendering, but there was nothing to render. We just had to load it and render it. And it's like, why are we doing this?
Easiest job ever.
Yeah, I was like, why are we doing this? So they basically made a script for the tracking team. Once the track was approved, it went straight to comp because it was just rendering. So yeah, that's correct. That's the right spot. Thank you so much. So Allan, why don't you talk about what's going on here?
And I love the canopies, by the way. So great job on those. And they'll show it in Australia. So yeah, this here I just thought as a quick demo. It's nothing fancy, but again, I just thought it was something we could just have in the background. But as an example, this is where I started actually a fresh shot with nothing in there. And all I'm doing is because if you think of like a bigger production, people are, they've gone and tracked the shots, they've gone and put together the HDRIs, they've got the plates all flattened, and everything's all ready for people to start working on. So there's no reason for me to go in and manually need to find all the stuff. And that's usually what takes up the most time. Is you go in, okay, well, I've got to go and create my file, then load up and find the plate, load that in, get the latest version for it, look up in Shotgun what the frame lengths are. It mightn't seem like, oh, it's not a big deal, but like this stuff takes time. So as an example here, all of that is done automatically. It's just you choose your shot, and then it will go and find, okay, where's the plate, where's the HDRI, where is the assets that are tied to this. So in this case, the LiDAR scan is brought in, as well as a proxy one. All the scene layers are automatically set up, and they're consistent across everything. So that way, everyone's using the same layering system. Render elements are done automatically. You can see the scene files are automatically done. as an example here, this is where I versioned up one. So I went from version 1 to version 2. It's very simple, but again, little things like this, people will forget and they'll overwrite their version 1 when they go to render because they saved their file as version 2 and they forgot to actually change their render settings. So again, just little stuff like that. So in this case, the render settings, like everything just automatically gets updated. The render elements get updated. So literally from the first click, the whole scene is ready to render. And in this case, I just dropped in a scene asset. And then you can also see all the materials. Everything is set up, the HDRIs are in the material editor already. IPR is working. But in this case, I think I wasn't paying attention, but like just as an example, I just had a tool which I made, which I click on the model. Actually, yeah, it's loading up now. So I click on a stupid little button and click the thing, and it's just a tool that would generate wires running all over the model just to create like a wire sculpt kind of mesh. So it's just something fun that I just thought looked pretty. But the whole point is that's, again, one click and I get to choose how many wires and I can change the thickness of the wires. So I'm not, I guess I am notorious for making really bad looking interfaces rather than trying to make them look pretty. But the whole point is just I can click update, it runs the thing again, and then when I'm happy with it, there it's got like 3,000 of those lines running across it. I can just hit bake, and then the mesh is finalized. And part of that will be that the material automatically applies, so the shaders, everything is set up right away. So that's just an example of me just saying, hey, well, let's add something pretty in, because right off the bat, it's the shot's set up and it's ready to render. The LiDAR's in, everything's matted, render elements are all set up. And the cool thing is that when I submit the render, the comp is also built as well. So either it creates the first one, or if you're working on the next version, then it's updating the older ones and changing the versions out for them. So just as an example there, it's just like dropping in an asset, running the tool. In this case, if it was like, hey, we've got to make all these wire sculpts, in these shots, whatever it might be, that would automatically happen. And then we can just, focus on whatever we need to do for the shot. But it means it takes seconds rather than, 15 minutes or whatever it might be. And then on top of that, the wire sculpting, if you do it manually, God knows how long. But that is just giving me more time, because you think how much that adds up over time, and then you multiply that by the amount of artists working on shots. That's where it really is a huge benefit. But the other thing I'll just quickly add in, this is me attempting to do terrible key light just to the side, the one bit of manual work in the whole thing. But you look at also who can script. I mean, I've known really great character animators who, when they started to learn expressions and a little bit of basic scripting, it allowed them to do so much more with their animation, with their rigs, with what they're doing. It doesn't matter who you are. Again, like if you're using buttons inside of Max or Maya or any program, then you can benefit from making your own buttons, making your own tools. And it's more about just looking at what you're doing every day. If you start to track what you're doing, after a while, be like, oh, I can make a button out of that. But the best part is that after a while, you're able to not only share these tools with everyone else on your team, but also you can start to understand like what their needs are, and you start to support your team as well. And I've found that anyone who is a technical director or who does learn the stuff, especially at like a small to mid-sized studio, so like 30 to 100 people, they're the ones, like if God forbid the studio was to start laying people off, it's always the TDs. It's always like the person who is able to script and automate is usually the last one to get let go, just because they're the one who is able to not only do so much and add something special to the team that no one else is really able to add, but on top of that, they're also supporting the team and the growth and allowing for so much to get done. So it's just a really great way to also position yourself in a team as being that highly irreplaceable person, because you're able to do so much. So I think it's such an important benefit for everyone. But unfortunately, most of us are intimidated by scripting and what to do. And that's where I think that it really comes down to, again, just not looking at the tutorials and stuff that are written by people. Even like anytime I've heard someone say it just requires a bit of high school math, and then I've gone and tried to read their book or their lessons, I'm just completely intimidated by what they're saying. And I think it's just more about thinking about it as an artist and looking at it creatively. About like, if you turn on in Maya, you got echo all commands in the script listener, or in Max, it's the Max script recorder. That will actually tell you when you click a sphere what the code is actually doing. And then you can, after a while, start looking at the code and being like, well, what if I change this one thing? And then when you learn how to do a loop, then it's like, well, now I can do that 10 times or 100 times. And after a while, it's just like, well, what else can I do? So those baby steps help you kind of go from being completely intimidated to, okay, now I'm curious. And that's when the fun starts to begin.